I'm Christopher Schoenwald, and welcome to Life as a show intently focused on helping people find their professional pathway by exploring and unearthing the details of jobs from around the world. Before we get into today's episode, I just want to throw this out there. I have a channel over on YouTube, Life as a ... which basically hosts highlights from these audio conversations that I have with these great guests. They typically run 10 to 15 minutes, and they're there to kind of present a different vantage point. You know, for people that aren't into audio, aren't into podcasts, but are still looking for career advice, ideas, help, all that great stuff, send them over to YouTube. Like I said, Life as a ... And if you do get over there, I would love that like or subscribe. I mean, it's the best way to let that algorithm know that the content is worth sharing and should be out there. So anyway, I do thank you for letting me plug this a little bit, but I think it's about time to get into today's episode. For a lot of people entering the workforce within the 21st century, the tech sector represents a lot. A lot in the way of opportunity, a lot in the way of exciting developments, and a lot in the way of uncertainty. And I thought it'd be a terrific chance to examine this world of tech with an individual who's been witnessing this industry alter itself for the past 30 years. And I might add that this guest is not just some talking head either. Far from it, in fact. He is someone who's been overseeing his entire country's industry body for digital technology. Yeah, he knows a thing or two about the IT industry. And he stopped by Life as a to chat about his life as a tech executive, the opportunities, challenges, and a whole lot more. So if you're someone who's interested in a career in tech, you ought not to miss this episode. Well, to get things kickstarted, let me fill you in a bit more about him and we can get off and running. Mark D. Nicholls is a partner and chief executive of the Australian-based IPG, or Information Professionals Group, where he leverages 30 plus years of cross-industry experience that drives technology transformation in organizations. And more specifically, he and his company, IPG, aid individuals and businesses in making sense of their digital priorities, optimal investments, and selecting fitting technology solutions. And Mark thrives on helping others navigate today's tech challenges, enabling their success within their capabilities. And further, his expertise is also heavily leaned upon as the director and previous deputy chair of the Australian Information Industry Association, the peak industry body for the digital technology sector in Australia. Now, despite the significant risks digital technology can represent at times, Mark is a passionate believer and champion of the immense benefits which can be had by organizations and communities if tech is managed well. So with all this noted, love to welcome you to my conversation with Mark D. Nicholls. Yeah, so welcome to the program. How are you doing today, Mark?
Well, thanks, Chris. How are you going?
Oh, excellent. Yeah, looking forward to this conversation for quite some time. And yeah, it's finally here and we can get into it. All right, well, I do have this first segment lined up, and it's something called Coloring Wikipedia. As my listeners know, it's a segment where I just read off a definition of something related to what the guest is all about. Now, surprise, surprise, I went with technology for you. Let me just read that off, and then after you could comment. Does it sound okay?
Yeah, that sounds fun.
Okay, so here we go. Technology. Technology is the application of conceptual knowledge to achieve practical goals, especially in a reproducible way. The word technology can also mean the products resulting from such efforts, including both tangible tools such as utensils or machines and intangible ones such as software. Technology plays a critical role in science, engineering, and everyday life. There it is, a bit wordy, and anyone with a grasp of the English language knows what technology is. And that's not the point of this segment here. What I would really like to get at is the nuanced look at it. And based off of all the work that you're part of, I'd love to hear what you think of that.
I mean, number one, I do agree with it. It's a pretty generic description, isn't it? But there's nothing not to agree with. Probably the only thing might be, some people might argue with it. I think you said non-tangible being software. Yeah, so maybe it's non-tangible. I think there's probably an argument to say it's a bit more tangible than that. It's real, right? It's stored. You can work with it. It creates things in conjunction with other technologies. The other area of technology, and particularly if we're talking digital technology, but not just digital, all technologies, which is definitely non-tangible, is the change in behaviors, the change in how people work with that technology, how they leverage it, business processes, what sort of data you might get from it that can be usable. These are much more non-tangible, but equally critical. And they're probably not classified as technology, perhaps where the boundary lies. But when it comes to actually making the technology useful, they're as important as the technology itself, right?
Mm. Yeah, and even like the element of change, I think, is kind of embedded within technology itself, right? Like, I don't know if that was exactly expressed within that definition, but I think that would be a
Yeah,
critical part. Like when you're really deeply thinking about what this means, and especially within your line of work, I mean, like that's what it's all based on, right?
yeah.
Is change and upgrades and moving forward. That would seem to be a big part of it too. No?
Oh, completely. We just had a call earlier today where we're talking with a client about smart digital factories and being able to gather data off that factory to optimize it. But optimizing is only step one. What do they do once they make it more efficient? Do they just enjoy some cost savings and therefore make better margins? Or do they then go, well, we can actually increase throughput and so we've got more volume? Or do we then go, well, actually, we've got more capacity to do different things. Maybe we can up the quality, or maybe we can save environmental costs. Maybe that means we can actually run out different product lines to make it more of a sustainable product line and create a higher margin product. Or maybe we've got spare capacity to be able to do some form of unique product we didn't have capacity to do before. So, there's sort of secondary and tertiary effects that come from how that technology is leveraged. Firstly, they've actually got to implement the technology and then change their basic processes. And then they can look at how they capitalize and do even more with it. So, there's lots of layers to that whole change agenda.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. We could probably spend 30, 40 minutes just speaking about this right now.
Definitely.
But I think this might
Yeah.
be an opportune time to learn a little bit more about you and your background, in particular your business, the Information Professionals Group. I did mention it off the top, but perhaps you could fill listeners in on a little bit more about who
Yeah,
you are and
sure.
what you do.
Yeah, definitely. So we work with mainly government, but not just government, private industry as well. And I mentioned one before. Government doesn't tend to own too many manufacturing plants, but they do and some. And government, health, utilities, and some private companies, and all across the digital technology supply chain, I guess you could call it that. So from strategy development. So take that example earlier around manufacturing plant is they've got a smart digital factory, but whether it's a digital factory, whether it's a digital strategy for an organization to work out how they want to leverage technology, what business benefits are they going to get from it, and what their investment priorities are. And because you can spend a lot of money and spend a lot of money getting nowhere, or you can actually direct that in a very targeted way to get specific business outcomes. So that's really that strategic picture, and then how you organize the management of that and the delivery of it. So if you're an organization and you want to improve the way in which you're using technology, then do you just build up a whole bunch of capability in-house and hire lots of staff? Do you actually look out for specialists out in the market? Do you use your existing suppliers and ask them to do more? Or is it some combination of those? And if it is a combination, what's that combination look like? And why is a particular combination right for you in terms of what capability do you want to build up, strategically important capability you want to have in-house versus things you might outsource? So these are all layers and layers of strategic questions to ask around how to spend money on technology, what outcomes you want for it, how to organize it, how to make decisions on it. And that's one area that we help our customers with. And then when it comes to spending it, it's around, well, what are those specific benefits? So, and how much are you going to spend for what purpose? So, business case development, benefits and cost modeling, all of the change management, business process, data management, that we talked about earlier, and then all the project management practices are there. And then the other one is cybersecurity, and I think we're going to talk about cybersecurity at some point today, probably. And that's all woven in. You can't talk about strategy for an organization without considering cybersecurity risks. What sort of risks does an organization have? Talking about a manufacturing plant, if their plant goes down, then they're not producing products, they're not earning any money. So that's obviously a risk. If they've got key intellectual property around designs, those designs get stolen and that's a competitive advantage for them, then they're obviously in difficulty. So what is the nature of the risk that they might have from a cybersecurity perspective? And then on the delivery side, of course, you got to deliver that and make sure that the security is actually built in to those practices and those systems and those processes that are being developed. So that's what we do, but we do that in a very product independent way. So yeah, one of the things that we're very strict on is we have guaranteed independence from any product providers and major integrators. And so there's a lot of commission structures and things of that nature in the IT game, which is completely fine and it's part of the commercial model. But we just stay exclusive away from that. So we're working alongside our clients, helping to make good decisions and implement wisely to get the business outcomes they're looking for. So that's really what Information Professionals Group is all about.
Yeah, there's a lot there, that's for sure. I mean,
Thanks.
yeah, one of the things I was thinking about as I was listening to you describe all of these different services and things that your business are involved in is the competitive nature of that industry. I would assume that in this day and age, I mean, technology is the name of the game. I mean, it's embedding itself into our lives and our personal lives and professional lives. Like everything, every day in the news is technology, AI. I mean, everything is constantly like churning within that world, I would assume. And based off of that, I would think that your industry, consulting, would also be expanding or having more entrants getting into this field just based on the flat out needs that companies and organizations and governments would need. Is that a correct assumption that I'd be making right now?
Yeah, to some degree, that's true. Of course, it's expanding, but it's also evolving. So some areas are decreasing in demand, other areas are increasing in demand. Again, touching on cybersecurity, there's a lot more demand in cybersecurity, but there's also a lot more companies providing services in cybersecurity. A lot more people, even experienced people, have basically pivoted in terms of their skill set to move into cybersecurity. So I would call it a very liquid, if you're familiar with that term, a finance term, really, in terms of liquidity of cash, but very liquid in the sense of skills and capabilities. The IT industry is so. Yeah, people do move based on where the demand is, and they'll realign their careers and their training accordingly. And so, yeah, it is quite adaptable, but it does ebb and flow. The biggest, and I would say, talking to most companies, certainly in the area that we play in, the biggest competitor to winning a deal is rarely a competitor as such. It's more the do nothing option. Yeah, we'll just delay that. We'll delay that unless it's critical to their operation. It can be an easy decision for some organizations to go, no, let's just kick that can down the road and we'll make a decision on that at a later stage. Yeah, COVID was the perfect example of that. When the pandemic happened, the IT sector went in two very opposite directions, depending on what you're exposed to. And so on the one side, companies that were exposed to licensing, as in, you license for particular numbers of users so they can use your service, then everybody was looking to digitalize, get their people working at home, offsite, wherever they could, just keep them as productive as they could. So licensing numbers skyrocketed. This is why valuations on Zoom, for instance, Teams, everything went crazy in some of these areas. Even Peloton, of course, that was part of the big drive behind Peloton. But basically, it's a technology for people to use at home and exercise, right? It's the same concept. So it's mums on seats increased. And so those companies increased massively. For companies like ours, which we don't sell licensing, as I mentioned, we're kind of exclusive from the product world. And so we work with companies that are forward investing in their business, forward investing to improve their business. And so that's a little bit more discretionary in terms of when they invest, how much they invest. And so at the start of COVID, all the forward investment for most companies dried up because they were all, oh no, we don't know what the future holds. And there's a high risk coming. So let's just batten down the hatches and see what happens. And that's what happened. Half of the industry, really flatlined, to be polite. It's probably below flatlining, and the other half skyrocketed. And so the biggest competitor is not necessarily another competitor. It is the do nothing, because a lot of it is discretionary. If there's not pressure to change, then sometimes the change can get delayed.
It's interesting. I mean, a couple of things I picked up on that. I'm coming from the perspective of somebody who's examining this world. They might have an interest in technology and they're trying to get a handle on career possibilities. And one of the things that stood out there is just the fluidity of it. I think that's the word that you might have used there in terms of skills and development and how people
Yeah.
might shift and jump around. And that can be an attractive point, I think, for a lot of people who are drawn to that, who don't want to be stuck in the same sort of thing, 9 to 5 every day for the next 40, 50 years, right? But I mean, if that's not you, then that could be a bit of a challenge. And again, I would assume that sort of pattern or that type of look at it might be, I don't know, it might be accelerating. Just again, the rate of technological change, it seems to be coming through right now. That
Yeah.
might be enhanced. So that'd certainly be something, if I were a young person looking at this, you might want to, consider that factor a little bit more deeply.
Yeah.
So yeah, I like that.
Yeah, well, I think that's right. Yeah. At the same time, yeah, there is still COBOL programmers out there, and other, legacy software developers that are out there, very comfortable and still maintaining that software. I do have a very old friend of mine who has migrated overseas now, but he was a COBOL programmer, and then he was getting on in his career. And then sometimes what can happen, people can get pigeonholed into particular areas, and he got pigeonholed as a COBOL programmer and exited work for a while, went and did a degree as an older age student, and learned up all the various modern programming languages, and then was looking for a job in that world, but couldn't get a start basically because he was older and perceived as being a fan of the old world, and then found himself plunked back in a job maintaining the same COBOL software that he wrote 20 years earlier. And it drove him mad, and he exited the industry
Yeah.
after that. So yeah, it's not perfect. I won't paint the picture as being perfect, but no, you do have a lot more opportunity compared to most industries to be able to have a bit more self-control and self-determination, perhaps is the best way of putting it, over what your career direction is. There's
Yeah.
always plenty of training, plenty of opportunities to reskill and then pivot and move around. Yeah.
Yeah, even like just to add on to this one last point before we move on to another segment here is that like I think part of being in that industry, like one of the inherent aspects of being in IT or technology provision services is that you have to be upgrading your skills, right? Just based on the rate of
Yeah.
change. And in doing so, you are skilling up and creating new opportunities for yourself to maybe pivot this way or that way. Just in
Correct.
self-preservation, again, just to
Yeah.
keep pace, you're allowing yourself opportunities to then possibly explore some other avenues that you might be able to get in, down the line. So anyway,
I agree. Yeah, I agree. In fact, I think that the impact of technology is even broader than the industry, the technology industry as such. You go into many business jobs now, and certainly executives now, and board members and executives, just taking that cohort or group. I mean, there was a time, if you go back, 20, 30 years ago, that you could successfully operate in those roles without having a great background or understanding of finance. Now it would be unheard of, right? Because everybody needs to know how to read a balance sheet and understand an income statement, and it would be frowned upon if you don't. The same with technology. It's catching up and changing, but generally you've got to have some grounding in technology and how technology is going to be used within your organization and the types of decisions you might be getting asked to make. And the same with cybersecurity. Increasingly, that needs to be integrated into many, many roles. And AI usage is a good example. How do you use AI? How can you leverage that into your roles today? Technology is becoming more and more pervasive to so many different jobs out there.
yeah, absolutely. Well, I do have this other segment here. I'd like to step into pathways, and this one's on you a little bit. I'd love to know about what brought you into this world. I mean, was technology a thing that was always attractive to you, or did you just sort of like stumble into it? I mean, how did this all evolve for you in particular?
I was pretty young at the time. I was actually going to be a chef when I was younger. In Australia, we have high school that runs from grade 8 to grade 12, and grade 8 is like a common subjects most of the time for most people. And then grade 9 and 10 is where I think in North America, for instance, they might call that junior high maybe, and that's where you first start selecting your subjects. And I did a lot of I was able to do cooking and classes, and just myself, a mate of mine, and a lot of women in those classes. But, but it wasn't accepted behaviour back then. But I wanted to be a chef. I thought if I'm going to be a chef, why not start learning, right? And so that was grade 9 and 10. my oldest brother was actually doing electrical engineering at university. He was about 4 or 5 years ahead of me, and he actually brought home this 8080 processor, and he was using that for some of his university assignments. And in the evenings, I used to, after dinner, I'd go down. Our dad had an office downstairs. He had this 8080 processor that my oldest brother was using, and I used to start playing with it. And I was coding basic language and coding assembler in it, and just teaching myself. And that's where I realized that this is actually a pretty cool piece of technology
Hmm.
and pretty cool tool. And I think this is going to make a big change to the world. And so I completely pivoted from my cooking expedition and then did maths and science in grade 11 and 12. And in grade 11 and 12, we had a very entrepreneurial maths teacher. I had two mathematics subjects, one of them a very entrepreneurial teacher, but he was also a massive horse racing fan. And we actually developed, based on his guidance, we developed and implemented a system on the computer that we had at school to bet on the races, and it was
Very, very
pretty
entrepreneurial. He
successful.
sounds.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. His
pretty
students are working
entrepreneurial.
on.
I I don't think you get away with it these days. For I think he would get he would get slapped in the line for sure. But it was great at the time, and
Yeah,
we had a
yeah.
lot of fun, and it was pretty successful. And yeah, so that was one introduction. My brother obviously helped a lot, and then yeah, it was we had a good taste of it during high school as to what we could do with it. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. There you go. One of the things that stands out there in listening to that story is some self-reflection. You're noticing that you were enjoying this, and what you were
yes,
getting
it's
out of it.
true.
And I think that's a key point, right? When you're considering careers, I know that's a really big challenge for a lot of young people when they are conflicted about what they want to do. Sometimes it's right in front of you. You might be doing something that you enjoy, but you're not really
Yeah,
consciously thinking of the options surrounding that. It might not be that particular activity of what you're doing, but what it
yeah,
represents could be an
yeah.
actual career pathway opportunity to explore or at least investigate further. And it sounds like that's what happened for you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think it's also, from what I see, is sometimes you can put too much pressure on these decisions. You just got to let them evolve a little bit and don't get caught up too much. I mean, most people are making multiple career changes during their life, right? And you pointed out the IT industry is quite open to doing career changes within the one industry sector. But yeah, most people are making multiple changes. It's not like you're making a lifelong career choice at age 18, 19, 20, whatever it might be.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Well, I have yet another segment I'd like to get into here at Q&A Discovery. We can kind of continue this back and forth. And again, on this topic of technology, like my impression of it, if I were entertaining this notion as somebody who's looking to get in this field, I could see it being like one, really exciting because it was something we've already spoken about, like the inherent change that's coming and the pace of change. I mean, that could be exciting for a lot of people. Also, at the same time, it could be a bit of frustration in there as well, I'm thinking, or some challenge because you're constantly having to upgrade those skills we've been speaking about earlier. And for some people, that might represent, an annoyance or something that it's just extra work and that might not be so attractive.
Mm,
And then plus, I mean, if you're going to dive into it a little bit more deeply and you're thinking about consulting or strategizing within this world, you're dealing with clients that are going to have varying levels of understanding or understanding of the
yeah,
technology and then the understanding of the importance of it and why they need to do this. And as you'd mentioned earlier,
yeah,
some of them are just going to put it off and as long as they
yeah.
can, when you yourself might feel that no, absolutely, you have to get onto this right now. I mean, so I could see the frustration there. I could also see the excitement. What's your take on all of this? Like, how would you encapsulate like what that sentiment that I'm trying to communicate across to you right now?
Certainly from a client perspective, if we take that type of framework where we're working with a client, you always need to respect, and this is maybe some of your listeners as well, whether they're an employee or whether they're consulting to a client, you've always got to respect the right for clients or executives, whoever their role is, to make their own decisions. Right? It is ultimately their decision to make. They own the risk. They own the benefits, the outcomes of whatever that decision is. We don't. And while we have their best intentions at heart, and we'll be recommending certain pathways for them and arguing for them appropriately, with the advantages and disadvantages, yeah, we can't sort of get too caught up in what they choose, because ultimately what they choose has to be right because they've chosen that, right.
Hmm.
And I mean, it doesn't mean that we haven't seen clients make bad choices. We definitely have, where we've advised them on certain things and they haven't always followed that advice, and then they've come into a lot of difficulty. Yeah, projects that have failed, money that's been spent unwisely and wasted. But yeah, that's pretty rare. Most cases, these are discretionary choices because ultimately there is no perfect choice in most of life. And the same with these types of technology decisions. There's no perfection. It's all about weighing up, well, what are the risks and advantages? What if I go in this direction? What are those risks? And are those risks things I'm comfortable accepting? Or in this direction, there might be different risks, but maybe I'm less comfortable with accepting those. Or maybe I don't feel as if I can manage those quite as well. Or maybe my organization doesn't feel like it's as comfortable with those. So these are all judgment calls. And the individual has to make them based on their role and their perspective. And so you just got to accept that and allow people to succeed or fail based on their own choices, but support them regardless along the way. So don't get too caught up in trying to have your perfect vision of the world, if you've got one, imposed on everybody else, because that's not necessarily the same as everybody's vision, right?
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Speaking of this topic, I suppose, and trying to convey the importance of certain things or potential solutions for your clients, something that would come up a couple times in the conversation already is cybersecurity. I would imagine that hasn't been the hardest of sells, perhaps, as compared to some of the other things that you might be selling right now. It's in the news constantly. There's enough horror stories, I think, that are on a scale that could frighten a lot of companies or organizations into thinking, okay, we do have to take this seriously and do something about this. What would you say to that? What have you seen there?
Yeah, it's definitely a motivator. And so yeah, there's definitely more money being spent in that area and has been for the last 5+ years, and that will continue. And driven by community expectations, driven by regulations that are accompanying those, and driven by the increased threat landscape out there. But it's not a bottomless ocean. But people don't have endless checkbooks to keep filling out for this stuff. So everybody's still got their budgets, and not every executive team or board will understand what their risk profile is and be making good decisions. Sometimes they could be overspending in certain areas that may not be wise. They could be underspending in areas, right? But there's certainly as well a lot of extra suppliers out there because a lot of people have pivoted. So demand is definitely increased, but at the same time, it doesn't mean it's a bottomless pit out there of funds, and then suppliers have also increased. So yeah, there's definitely more business in that area, and you need to integrate that perspective into everything that we do in digital technology. But no, there's no sort of luxurious ride of free cash coming in the
Yeah,
door.
right, right. Would you say from an individual's point of view or perspective, if they're considering the entry points into, say, tech consulting or within this sector that you're within, investing in cybersecurity skills and getting those skills as an entry point into that industry, would you say that'd be a wise choice for an individual?
Oh, potentially, yeah. Yeah, look, I think as long as it fits their style. And having said that, I mean, just because you're in cybersecurity, it doesn't mean you're a technical person. Just because you're in technology doesn't mean you're a technical person. And so I think that's the first thing is going, right, well, where are my strengths and interests lie? Do I like engaging with people and having conversations and finding common ground with them, and then talking about what great outcomes might look like for them, and then matching it up with say what my company can do or what other people can do. Is that where my passion and interests lie? Is it sitting in at my desk and sort of coding and understanding optimal code, or fine tuning the way servers operate, whatever it could be, very technical skills, or some blend of other things, right? So I think that's first is where your skills and your personal style and passions lie. And then definitely cybersecurity would be a home because there's a lot in cybersecurity, but anything in technology potentially has a home, right? So cybersecurity is in demand, but that also means that other areas are in demand. Information and data is a big in demand area as well, because if you're putting up cybersecurity controls, for the most part, what are you protecting? You're protecting the information and data. How do you know what you got to protect? Well, you got to know what you got. You got to know where it is and how much it needs to be protected. And then, of course, if you look at AI, what is the fuel that drives AI? For the most part, the fuel that drives AI is information and data. What information and data should you be using, or can you use, or should you use? Because you want to use AI, but you've also got to protect privacy at the same time. And so, again, you need to be understanding what data you have. So there's cascading implications for all these technologies. No technology kind of resides on its own without an impact on others. And so, while there is cybersecurity demand, information and data management skills is growing rapidly, and will probably have to grow even more rapidly. As you've seen in the news, AI it creates a lot more processing requirements, and so things like chip architecture, chip manufacturing, data centers, these are all growing as well. So there's cascading impacts right through industry as a result.
Yeah, I just had a cybersecurity expert on not too long ago on the program, and one of the topics that we got into was kind of centered on this. Like there's so much more than what you just assume. Like you might think cybersecurity is just ethical hacking, perhaps, or coding, or something of that nature. But what
Yeah.
this guest was stating is like there's so much more. Obviously, there's like marketing within that field. There's like the HR side of it. There's a
Yeah.
whole different, like you said, these
Oh,
cascading
yeah.
sort of effects and areas that you can explore. If this main topic of cybersecurity is of interest to you, how do your skills, abilities, your personality, how do these elements fit into it? And if you look a little bit more closely, I'm sure there could be areas that, that could align for you. And it sounds like, what you were just explaining
Completely.
is, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I know one professional in that area. He just focuses solely on what's called insider threats. So basically, people within an organization that either accidentally or maliciously, do something not good, and so there's a whole science just around that, right? And that's where this one professional focuses.
Yeah, yeah, there you go. Which is it is not the coding or the hacking per se.
No,
It's yeah,
no.
analyzing threats, right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
So
one particular group of individuals and the threats and that particular group might pose, and how to assess, control, monitor, measure those
there
threats.
you go, right? There you go. These are jobs that just would not have been here 5, 10 years ago, right? Which is pretty fascinating
No,
as well,
completely.
when you think
Yeah,
about it that way.
exactly.
Within this realm of, technology, provision, services, and whatnot, there's technical skills certainly you have to have. Once you do find what you're after, whatever that's going to be. But then also I'd be curious about some of like the non-technical skills that you've seen that are helpful or maybe even essential, you'd say, to doing a good job or thriving within this
Yeah,
sector. What would you say some of those are?
you've got a lot of different skills we talked about. So just the ability to communicate, right, across these different boundaries and bring people together to drive an individual or a business outcome. There's a skill right there to be able to have these dialogues with different personalities, different types of styles, in fact, different languages at times almost. Bringing those people together, that's a skill. Being able to see common ground between people, being able to understand negotiation and find that common ground and resolve any differences. Yeah, ethics is a big factor, of course, becoming even bigger with AI. What is a reasonable thing to do and the right thing to do and the fair thing to do and all these sorts of questions. And ethicists, like there's a role for you. Yeah, ethics experts in many companies are becoming a bit more prominent now with those that are using AI more, and particularly product companies that are developing products have ethicists in there to make these decisions and guide companies. Change management, we mentioned before, as how do people need to evolve and change their practices for the way they interact with technology and do their daily jobs. There's some technical aspects to that, but there's also a lot of communications and marketing, internal marketing that goes along with that. There's all the sales side. There's a lot of salespeople have made a lot of money out of the technology industry by being very good salesmen, right? And yeah, if you work with people, you can problem solve, then that's a great option for people. Yeah, so there's a range of different opportunities in the tech sector, massive range.
Certainly. I got one last question in this segment here, and this one's centered on you. Like Yeah, I think in your tagline on LinkedIn is like you've been in the industry for about 30 years now. Driving technology, helping organizations. Now, I'd like to know like what has been driving all of this action for you in particular. What keeps you motivated throughout?
I think all that passion, there's everyday examples of it. One big recent one was I got back into my triathlons in 2022, and so I've done a lot of triathlons in my life, but I had about a 10-year break, and so as you can imagine, in fact it was longer than that, but let's say 2012 to 2022. Imagine the technology shifts that happened in that time. And of course, when I was in triathlons earlier, I was an early adopter on my technology, but it was pretty limited. Yeah, you had a Garmin smartwatch, but it certainly couldn't measure all your power output on the bike and things like that, and it was all pretty limited. It measured speed by having a little sensor on the wheel, and then it counted the number of revolutions of your wheel, and then worked out speed that way. I'm sure you've seen that old tech. And then when I came back, I mean, the technology is just phenomenal.
Oh yeah.
Like I've got so much tech now. And then the challenge for me was I went and bought all this tech. I bought for my swim. I bought my Form swim goggles, which gives me the heads-up display to count my laps and measure my stroke counts and runs my programs for me in the pool. On the bike, I ride in Zwift, in the virtual world in Zwift. I got my trainer at home, which gives me perfect wattage output numbers and tells me what I got to do. I've got the same on my bike. I've got power measures in my bike, smart treadmills, and I've got a stride pod, which actually measures power output when I run. And that goes into all these areas. But it took me months to actually, I was buying all this stuff. And it took me months to work out how to use it all
That's the
and how,
problem. That's the problem that I have
and
as
then how to
well.
connect it all
I
together,
love
right?
it, but yes, yes.
But that experience again, just being away from that sport for 10 years, it was like, wow, look at that. Look what's happened here. And sometimes it can be easy to underestimate what happens when you're just seeing it every day. But when you have a gap of 10 years and then you get dropped back into it, it's like, whoa, this is incredible. And so yeah, that adds motivation and fuel. Like it just adds wonder and excitement, right? Even though I've been around for a while, to still have that opportunity to experience the wonder and excitement of new technology is good. And that example is there, but I still see it in other areas. I think a lot of us have gone through that with experiencing AI in the last couple of years, how accessible it is and how easy it is to tap into pretty unique technology. So it is that the curiosity of it all and the wonder and excitement that comes from it keeps me motivated for sure.
Yeah, I love that answer because I think that represents a lot. And whether we're talking IT, whether we're talking technology, or something completely different, I think that's a big key point within careers and having satisfaction within that realm that you're in professionally, but then also personally too. Is if you can find that,
Yeah,
that drive to continually like learn and update your own
yeah,
knowledge set and keep that curiosity, the word that you use there of trying to figure out a little bit more and
definitely.
diving a little bit deeper. Like all of that stuff keeps you on
Yeah,
your toes, and that drives
yes,
motivation. It fuels you, and I think that's a key point, and I think that's such an
yeah.
important one that's often overlooked, at least. All right, well, we are running the bend into this last segment here, a crystal ball segment, and as the name implies, we're looking towards the future, trends, predictions, so on and so forth here. And again, returning to you, your business, your profession is defined by technology, and I'd love to get your take on where we're headed. I mean, you just brought it up, AI again, and we've kind of like skirted that topic a couple times here, but maybe we could get into it a little bit more. Like, how do you see technology shifting and changing the world and the business that you're within?
I'm not a futurist, number one, right? But what futurists tend to do is use trajectories and look at where things are tracking, and if they keep tracking in that direction, then what's likely to happen. But I do hear interesting stories, and so I heard a really interesting story last month, and it was actually some medical professionals, and they were talking about how they're trying to accelerate, the cloning of human body parts, and they felt that it was important to try and accelerate this. And their reasoning is that they were saying that, well, based on automation of vehicles and the likely reduction in road injuries as a result of automation of vehicles, then there'll be a lot less organs that we can harvest for transplants. And so therefore, we're going to have to look for alternatives, and one of those is cloning. And so, yeah, that's a sort of secondary and tertiary type things that might be there. And it takes a lot of deep thought to kind of come
Yeah.
up with these types of scenarios.
Yeah.
And there's people out there doing that type of thinking. So I'm pretty simple when it comes to sort of projecting. Obviously, things like cybersecurity, we know it's increasing. We know regulations increasing. We know the threats are increasing. So we know generally, sophistication of protection, good decision making around protection will be more important. We know information and data is going to be more and more important. Yeah, I think privacy and digital IDs and things of that nature, they kind of go hand in hand. They're kind of like two sides of the same coin, so to speak. Is on the one side we want much better, easier ways of transacting and interacting, and having to put all our identity documents everywhere isn't great. But on the other side, people are becoming much more aware of privacy and the need to be able to operate discreetly, and it's reasonable that some things we don't want to be trackable for, right? So there's all that sort of element that weighs into people's social interests, and that varies a lot, right? So I think that's going to be a big challenging area to see how that plays out over the next couple of years. I just know it's going to be much more topical. I don't know exactly how it'll play out. But in terms of, the cascading type of scenarios, it's like the butterfly flaps its wings type of scenario, isn't it, with the cloning? I think there's a few of those that are going to occur. I just don't know exactly where or when, but they'll definitely be occurring.
Absolutely. One other thing I like to bring up here too. I think a couple of weeks ago I saw an article, and it was talking about different companies that were anonymously surveyed, or the employees were, about their experiences with AI in their organizations. And what they were saying is a lot of these companies that these people were working for had adopted so many different AI-based tools that are supposed to increase efficiencies that it actually added new layers to the workflow and actually had
Right.
added more work when the point was to reduce it,
Yeah.
because one, they had
Yeah.
to learn it, but then also two, I
Yeah.
mean, some of the unforeseen consequences of, okay, if we do this, then that creates another thing that we have to do for this department, and this information's got to go over here. And
Yeah.
it just added up to a little bit more. And I think that's kind of an interesting one that's, returning to the way off, maybe 5-10 years down the line, even just right now in the next year or 2, 3 years, I think there's going to be something
Yeah.
about managing these tools and finding a little bit more, I don't know, a streamlined way of going about it and strategizing all of this.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah, definitely. I mean, for instance, using AI tools for most things, you've got to be reviewing and checking, particularly your generative AI, and it's creating some form of words for you. Then the hallucination thing and is definitely real. I've seen it just make stuff up, right? And you go try and trace back to where it's saying this stuff, and there's no evidence anywhere. It's just made it up. And of course, it's getting better, but it doesn't mean that risk not is gone away. It's still there. And the biasing, if you're asking it for subjective type topics, then bias is definitely pretty rife in there. So if you're doing small jobs, like some people talk about use cases to help write an email reply. Yeah, unless you're writing an essays or email reply, I just can't see how that's particularly productive, because it's going to take you as long to get the tool to write something, and then you have to carefully to review it and rewrite it. It's just to write it yourself in the first place. So there is things like that, but I think it does depend on experience, right, and how the experience matches up to the task. So writing an email, I don't know how many million I've written, probably a similar number as yourself, Chris. We've both written plenty, but some topics for some emails might be challenging for some people with less experience, and so therefore it could be a good tool for that. I think Gartner, the big research firm, based on their research, they were saying they categorized AI use cases, and they came up with a couple of categories where they felt there was the biggest gains to be made. And one was for non-complex tasks and inexperienced users. And the example they used was call center staff. So call center staff it's not that complex, the job, but you do have a lot of information you got to be aware of, and you got to piece that information together with whatever the caller's requesting. And so as an inexperienced person, when you're learning, what all the service line is and the type of inquiries that will come in and where you source information for those inquiries, that's a lot of volume you've got to get through. And AI is a big accelerator as an inexperienced person. But for somebody who's worked in that call center for 10 years, AI doesn't help them. They're already on top of it, right? And so it's an accelerator for low experienced people on simple jobs. And then the other opposite end was high complex jobs and highly experienced people. And the example that they used was lawyers, where if you've got a lawyer who is very highly experienced and is preparing a case and wanting to do research and accelerate research or look at different scenarios, then they've got enough knowledge to be able to frame the right questions and frame what they're looking for and what help they need. And so therefore, high complex job, highly experienced, and they can get good acceleration. But a low experienced lawyer probably not know exactly what questions to ask or what lines of inquiries to take, and therefore what support they need from the AI. And so therefore not as well able to get support that way. So I think, from what I've seen, that's probably a quite a good framework to think about those that can accelerate. That's today, of course. In the future, who knows? The AIs will evolve, use cases will evolve, tools will evolve. But that's one way of thinking about it anyway.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it's fascinating to consider, where we're going and where we could be a year, 3, 5 years down the line here. So
Completely. Yeah.
one last question here for you, Mark. Do you have any advice to a young person or somebody who's maybe mid-career that's looking to get into this sector, centered on technology? Any particular advice you'd give to somebody like that?
Don't get too caught up on this being the last decision you make in this area.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, nothing wrong with dipping your toe in and seeing how it goes and then being able to pivot or move on if it doesn't work out. So that's number one, is give it a go. Yeah, possibly before that is get rid of any stereotypes you might have about the industry, because it's not just a techie industry. There's a lot of diverse skills and styles and people within the industry. So I'm sure for most people, there'll be a home there. It's just whether you look hard enough or open enough. And then, even if there's not, or that particular first step doesn't suit you, then, how do you pivot? How do you change? And how do you take control through your own professional development with your own training? There's so much training opportunities out there to actually self-teach. And so many these days, whether it's, LinkedIn Learning, whether it's, Coursera and the other massive online coursing that's out there, or it's just YouTube, right? There's people out there. Be a bit more careful with the non-curated, but there's plenty of opportunities there to self-develop.
Well, on that note, this might be a nice point to wrap up this conversation here, Mark. But I got to say, enjoyed it. We've blown right through it. I can't believe we've come to the conclusion of it. So thanks again for all your time and insights. It's been a true pleasure.
Oh, you're welcome, Chris. Great to talk to you.
Now, for those interested in learning more about Mark and his work, you can do so via LinkedIn. You can also check out his company's website, IPG, or Information Professionals Group. And for reference, all this information, including the links, will be in the show notes. And hey, if you like today's show, please be sure to tell a friend and share. To show further support, you can always rate, review, and subscribe wherever you access your podcasts. And lastly, as I mentioned off the top, head on over to YouTube. I do have a channel over there which hosts highlights from these audio conversations. And if you do make it over there, I would love a like or subscribe. Now, finally, don't forget to join us on the next episode of Life as a... You could literally be one listen away from finding your dream job. I'm Christopher Schoenwald, your host. Until next time, don't settle for less. Find the career you were born for.